The click of the front door lock echoed louder than a gunshot in the rain-soaked night. For Lila, standing on the porch with nothing but the clothes on her back and the life growing inside her, that sound wasn't just a door closing. It was the sound of her world shattering, of every promise turning to dust. Her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her, had just thrown her out like garbage, his voice dripping with a venom she'd never known. He thought he had won. He thought he had secured his future. What he didn't know was that Lila's past, a past he had so carelessly dismissed, was about to arrive with an army of lawyers and a truth that would bring his emir of lies crashing down around him. The house was Brent's masterpiece. Perched on a manicured hill overlooking the city, the sprawling modern home was all clean lines, glass walls, and cold-polished concrete. It was less a home and more a statement, a monument to his ambition. Brent Patterson loved statements. He loved his imported Italian suits, his Swiss watch that cost more than a modest car, and his wife Lila, who he often thought of as his most beautiful acquisition. Lila moved through the cavernous rooms like a ghost. She had tried to warm the place, adding soft throws to the minimalist leather sofas and placing family photos on the sterile floating shelves. But Brent would always move them, tidying her warmth away. "It clutters the aesthetic, darling," he'd say, not unkindly, but with a finality that permitted no argument. Their life, to any outside observer, was perfect. Brent was a rising star in real estate development, turning forgotten city lots into luxury condos. Lila was the gentle, graceful wife, the perfect hostess for his business dinners, her quiet smile a perfect accessory to his booming charisma. But lately the silence in the house had grown heavy. Brent was working later. His phone was always face down on the nightstand, and his touch, when it came at all, was fleeting and distracted. The change had sharpened when Lila told him she was pregnant. She had expected joy, perhaps even a crack in his meticulously composed facade. Instead, he had stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "A baby," he'd said the words flat. "Well, that's an expense." The comment had stung more than she let on. Her father, Robert Conway, was a man of quiet but considerable means. He had been a banker his entire life, a shrewd but fair man who had built a small regional bank into a significant financial institution through decades of patient, clever work. He had never been flashy. He drove a 10-year-old sedan and lived in the same comfortable but unpretentious suburban home Lila had grown up in. When they married, Robert had gifted them the down payment for their house, a sum so generous it had left Brent speechless. For Brent, who worshipped at the altar of wealth, Robert's quiet humility was a source of constant irritation. He saw it as a weakness, a failure to properly display his success. "Your father could own half the city if he wanted." Brent would often complain after a family dinner, "but he's content to sit on his gold like a dragon." No vision. Lila would defend him. "He's happy, Brent. He doesn't need to prove anything. Success is about proving things, Lila. It's the only thing that matters." Now, 4 months into her pregnancy, the distance between them had become a chasm. Brent's comments about the expense of a child had become a recurring theme. He'd sigh dramatically over the cost of a crib, complain about the future hospital bills, and scrutinize every purchase she made. It was bizarre, given the lavish lifestyle he insisted upon for himself. One evening, as she was looking at a catalogue for nursery furniture, he'd snatched it from her hands. "We need to be practical," he'd snapped. We have the mortgage, the car payments. We can't afford to be frivolous." Frivolous? She'd asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This is for our child, Brent. And what about that new watch you just bought?" He waved a dismissive hand. "That was an investment. It's about maintaining an image. You don't understand business." The condescension was a constant grating presence. He treated her like a child, a beautiful but simple-minded doll he kept in his glass house. The man she had fallen in love with, the charming, ambitious go-getter who had made her feel like the center of the universe, had vanished, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. Her heart ached with a confusion she couldn't articulate. She told herself it was the stress of his work, the pressure of a new baby. She made excuses because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The truth, however, was far uglier than she could have ever imagined, and it was about to come knocking. Or rather, it was about to be revealed in the sharp, artificial scent of a perfume that wasn't hers. It happened on a Tuesday. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, the sky a bruised purple. Brent had come home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a cloying floral perfume. Lila, who had been fighting a wave of morning sickness that had decided to strike in the evening, was curled on the couch. She smelled it the moment he leaned in to give her a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. It wasn't her perfume. Hers was a subtle citrus scent. This was heavy, musky, and aggressive. It clung to the lapel of his suit jacket. "You're late," she said, her voice small. "Big deal went through." "Had to celebrate with the team," he said, already pulling off his tie and heading towards the bar. He didn't look at her. He never seemed to look at her anymore. Not really. He looked at her stomach with a faint look of annoyance, but his eyes slid past hers as if she were part of the furniture. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through her nausea. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a certainty, solidifying in her gut. She stood up, her hand instinctively going to her small, burgeoning belly. "What's her name, Brent?" He froze, his back to her, a crystal tumbler in his hand. "What are you talking about?" "The perfume. The late nights. The phone calls you walk out of the room to take." "I'm not stupid. What's her name?" He turned slowly, and for the first time in months, he looked directly at her. But there was no love in his eyes. There was only ice. "Don't be hysterical, Lila. It's not a good look on you, especially not now." He gestured vaguely at her stomach. "Tell me," she insisted, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Fine. You want to know her name is Naomi. And yes, we've been seeing each other. For a while, actually." The words hit her with a physical force. She staggered back, grabbing the arm of the sofa for support. The room seemed to tilt, the sharp angles of their designer furniture blurring at the edges. "But we're married. I'm pregnant with your child." "An inconvenient development, I'll admit," he said, taking a sip of his whiskey. His calmness was the most brutal part. He spoke of their life, their marriage, their unborn child, as if they were minor line items in a business ledger. "Look, Lila, I'm going to be honest with you. This whole thing, it's not working for me anymore. This whole thing." "You mean our marriage?" she whispered, disbelief warring with a tidal wave of pain. "I married you for your potential, Lila. I thought your father's connections, his money, would be an asset. But he's a relic. He doesn't understand how the modern world works. He handed me a check for the down payment, and that was it. No introductions, no opening doors. Just that." He sneered. Naomi, her family. They're different. They're players. They understand ambition. They're the future. Each word was a calculated strike designed to wound. He was telling her she was nothing more than a failed investment. Her family, the people she loved, were obsolete. "So you used me," she said, the realization dawning with horrific clarity. "You married me, hoping my father would fund your entire life. I had hoped he would be a more active investor." "Yes," Brent said smoothly. "But that's beside the point now. Naomi and I are going to build something real. And frankly, this house, this life, it's not big enough for 3 of us, and I certainly have no intention of it being big enough for 4. The cruelty of his last statement finally broke her. Sobs racked her body. "So what are you saying? You're just leaving?" "Not exactly," he said, setting his glass down with a soft click. He walked towards the front door. "You're leaving?" Lila stared at him, her mind unable to process the words. "What? No. This is my home, too. I'm carrying your baby. You can't just throw me out. Watch me," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. He was surprisingly strong. He pulled her towards the foyer, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor. "This house is in my name, Lila. The mortgage is in my name. Everything that matters is in my name. You came into this with nothing but your father's check, and you'll leave with the same." "Brent." "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this. Think about the baby." "I am," he said, his face a mask of stone as he opened the front door. The wind and rain lashed at them. "I'm thinking this is the cleanest break. Now get out." He didn't just usher her out, he shoved her. She stumbled onto the wet stone of the porch, catching herself just before she fell. He threw her purse out after her. It landed in a puddle with a splash. Then, before she could even turn around, he closed the door. The heavy custom-made oak door swung shut, and with a final definitive click, the deadbolt slid into place. It was the sound of her world ending. The rain was cold, instantly soaking through her thin silk blouse. Lila stood on the porch, trembling not just from the chill, but from the profound shock that had paralyzed her entire body. The warm yellow light from inside the house. Her house seemed to mock her, illuminating the life she no longer had access to. Her mind reeled, trying to make sense of the last 10 minutes. The confession, the cold, businesslike dismissal, the shove. It was a nightmare. Her purse lay in the puddle. With numb fingers she retrieved it, the leather already waterlogged. Her phone was inside. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unlock it. Who could she call? Her friends would be horrified, but what could they do? She had one person, the one person who had always been her rock, her safe harbor, her father. She scrolled to his name, Dad, and pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. She almost hung up, ashamed and humiliated, not wanting to burden him with her catastrophic failure of a marriage. Lila Bean. His voice, warm and familiar, was almost her undoing. A fresh wave of sobs escaped her. "Dad," she choked out. "Lila. What's wrong? Where are you? It sounds like you're outside." The concern in his voice was immediate and absolute. Brent, he threw me out," she managed to say between gasps. "He told me he's been cheating on me, and he He pushed me out of the house. He locked the door. There was a silence on the other end of the line, but it wasn't a passive silence. It was dense, heavy, like the pressure before a lightning strike. She could picture him perfectly sitting in his old leather armchair, his brow furrowed, his calm demeanor hardening into something else entirely. "Where are you right now, honey?" His voice was dangerously calm. All the warmth was gone, replaced by a focused, steely edge. "I'm on the porch. It's raining. Stay right there. Don't move. I'm going to make 2 calls and then I'm coming to get you. It will take me about 45 minutes. Can you find a dry spot under the eaves and wait for me?" "Okay," she whispered. "Lila, listen to me. Did he hurt you? Did he put his hands on you in any way other than pushing you out the door?" "He grabbed my arm," she said, her voice barely audible. Another pause. Longer this time. "I see Robert Conway," said, and the 2 words carried more menace than 1,000 shouted threats. "I'll be there soon. I love you." He hung up. Lila huddled under the small overhang of the porch roof, wrapping her arms around herself. The baby. Her mind raced with fear. The stress, the cold. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, trying to shield the tiny life from the ugliness of the world. Brent's words echoed in her head. A failed investment. An inconvenient development. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had negated her very existence and that of their child. 45 minutes felt like an eternity. Each passing car on the distant road made her jump. She imagined Brent inside, warm and dry, probably already on the phone with Naomi, laughing about how easy it had been to dispose of his pregnant wife. The thought fueled a new emotion alongside the pain and fear, a slow burning anger. How could she have been so blind? The signs had all been there. His obsession with status, his disdain for her family's quiet life, his transactional view of relationships. She had mistaken his ambition for passion, his materialism for a desire to provide. She had built a fantasy around a man who was hollow at his core. Finally, the familiar headlights of her father's old sedan cut through the rain. The car pulled into the sweeping driveway, looking utterly out of place next to Brent's sleek German sports car. Her father got out a large coat and an umbrella in his hands. He didn't say a word. He just walked up the steps, wrapped the warm, dry coat around her shivering shoulders, and held the umbrella over her head. He looked at the locked door, his expression grim. Then he looked at the bruise already forming on her arm, where Brent had grabbed her. His jaw tightened. "Let's go home," he said softly, leading her to his car. As she settled into the passenger seat, the familiar scent of old books and peppermints, a balm to her shattered nerves, she looked back at the glass house on the hill. It looked like a prison now, a beautiful empty cage. She didn't know what her father had planned, what those 2 phone calls had been about. She only knew that the storm that had broken over her life was far from over. The drive back to her childhood home was mostly silent. Robert let his daughter cry, offering a comforting hand on her shoulder but not pressing her with questions. He knew Lila needed to process the shock, and he needed time to let his own cold, calculated rage settle into a workable plan. When they arrived, her mother Helen was waiting, her face etched with worry. She enveloped Lila in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and safety, clucking over her wet clothes and ushering her upstairs to a warm bath and a comfortable bed. Downstairs, Robert sat in his study. The room was his sanctuary, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled not with fiction, but with volumes on economic theory, corporate law, and financial history. He wasn't a flashy man, but he was a deeply intelligent one. He understood that true power wasn't in loud declarations. It was in the fine print. It was in the structure of debt, the ownership of assets, and the unbreakable chains of liability. Brent Patterson had made one fatal mistake. He had looked at Robert Conway and seen a simple, small-town banker. He had failed to do his due diligence. He had no idea that Robert's regional bank, Conway Trust and Financial, had, over the last decade, quietly and strategically acquired smaller debt-holding firms, commercial loan portfolios, and venture capital branches. Robert didn't own a building with his name in flashing lights, but he owned the paper on hundreds of them. His influence was a vast, invisible web, and Brent had just flown right into the middle of it. His first call had been to his head of legal counsel, a sharp, merciless woman named Miss Chen. His second had been to the president of his commercial loans division, a man named Mr. Davies. Now he sat at his large mahogany desk and opened his laptop. He typed in Patterson Development LLC. The screen filled with data. Robert's eyes scanned the numbers, his expression unchanging. He saw the business loans Brent had taken out to fund his last 2 condo projects loans from a large national bank. He clicked a few more times, tracing the ownership of that debt. As he suspected, the portfolio containing those loans had been part of an acquisition by one of his subsidiary firms 6 months ago. Brent was borrowing his father-in-law's money and had no idea. Next, he looked up the mortgage on the house. It was also with a major lender. Another few clicks. Conway Trust had bought that lender's regional mortgage division last year. Brent was paying his mortgage to his father-in-law. Finally, he accessed Brent's personal credit lines, the ones tied to his business account for his platinum cards, the ones he used for his fancy suits and dinners with Naomi. The underlying creditor was again a company that ultimately reported to the board of Conway Trust and Financial. Robert leaned back in his chair. Brent had built his entire life, his entire illusion of success, using Robert's money. He had taken the generous gift of a down payment and used it as leverage to indebt himself to the very man he dismissed as a relic. It was an irony so perfect, so complete, that Robert almost smiled. Almost. The image of the bruise on his daughter's arm stopped him. This would not be a loud, angry confrontation. That was not his style. This would be a quiet, methodical, and complete dismantling. Brent had treated his daughter like a balance sheet. Robert would now show him what a real accounting looked like. He spent the next 2 days in his study. Lila rested comforted by her mother speaking in hushed tones about the betrayal. She was terrified about the future, about being a single mother, about having nothing. "Don't you worry about a thing," Lila Bean Robert told her firmly during a quiet moment in the kitchen. "You and this baby are all that matters. You just focus on being healthy. Let me worry about the details." On the 3rd day, a Friday morning, Robert put on his best, most unassuming grey suit. Ms. Chen and Mr. Davies met him in the driveway. They were the opposite of unassuming. Ms. Chen was impeccably dressed in a razor-sharp navy suit, her leather briefcase gleaming. Mr. Davies was a tall, imposing man whose sober, dark suit seemed to radiate authority. They didn't look like they were visiting family. They looked like they were executing a foreclosure, which in a way they were. "Is everything in order?" Robert asked them as he got into the back of Miss Chen's town car. Miss Chen handed him a thick folder. Every loan, every credit line, every asset. "He's leveraged to the hilt, Robert. The default clauses are ironclad. We have grounds to call in the entirety of his debt based on projected business instability and material misrepresentation on his initial loan applications. Misrepresentation? Robert asked, raising an eyebrow. He listed his marital connection to you as a potential future asset, implying a financial backing from your family that was never formally guaranteed, Mr. Davies supplied from the front seat. He used your good name to secure our money. Robert nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction settling in. Good. Let's go pay my son-in-law a visit. For Brent, the 3 days since he'd thrown Lila out had been a heady mix of liberation and triumph. The silence in the minimalist house was no longer heavy. It was clean. It was the sound of potential of a future unburdened by a clingy wife and the expense of a child he never wanted. He had called Naomi the moment Lila's taxi had disappeared down the street. It's done, he'd said, a smirk in his voice. The house is ours. Naomi had squealed with delight. She had come over that night, her expensive perfume finally able to permeate the space without competition. They had toasted with champagne, standing in front of the massive glass wall that overlooked the city lights. To us, Naomi had said, clinking her glass against his. To the new power couple. To a future without baggage, Brent had replied, his arm around her waist. They spent the next 2 days acting as if they were already masters of the manor. Naomi talked excitedly about redecorating, about turning the room Lila had planned as a nursery into a home gym and yoga studio. No need for all that soft, sentimental clutter, she'd declared, wrinkling her nose at the pastel paint swatches Lila had left on a counter. Brent had never felt more powerful. He had, in his mind, executed a perfect corporate merger. He had divested from a failing asset, Lila and her stagnant family, and acquired a new promising one, Naomi and her well-connected aggressive family. He'd even had a preliminary lunch with Naomi's father, a cutthroat developer who saw Brent as a kindred spirit. The future was bright, shiny, and expensive. He spent Friday morning on the phone with his contractors, barking orders about his new condo project, feeling the familiar thrill of command. He was the king of his castle, the master of his universe. When the doorbell chimed around 11 o'clock, he was annoyed. He wasn't expecting anyone. He glanced at the security camera feed on his phone. A black town car was in his driveway. Standing on his porch were 3 figures. One was Robert Conway, looking as dull and unimpressive as ever in his cheap-looking grey suit. The other 2, however, were different. A man and a woman, both dressed in severe, expensive business attire, holding sleek leather briefcases. They looked like lawyers. Brent's first thought was that Robert had come to plead on Lila's behalf, maybe to offer him some money to take her back. A smirk touched his lips. He would enjoy turning him down. He strode to the door and pulled it open with a flourish. "Robert," he said, his tone dripping with false cordiality. "To what do I owe the pleasure? And you've brought associates." "Brent Robert," said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "This is Ms. Chen, my chief counsel, and this is Mr. Davies from my commercial assets division. May we come in? We have some business to discuss." The mention of commercial assets gave Brent a momentary pause, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. They were here to talk about a settlement, a divorce. This was just Robert trying to look intimidating. "Of course," Brent said, stepping aside. "Come on in. Can I get you anything coffee water? We won't be staying long." Ms. Chen said, her voice as sharp and cold as the angles of the house. They didn't sit on the offered sofa. They stood in the center of the vast living room, a phalanx of grim-faced professionals. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The feeling of triumph that Brent had been savoring began to curdle into a vague sense of unease. So Brent began trying to take control of the situation. I assume this is about Lila. Look, I'm sorry it had to end this way, but these things happen. I'm prepared to be very reasonable about the divorce settlement. Robert looked at him, a flicker of something that might have been pity in his eyes. We're not here to discuss the divorce, Brent. That's a personal matter for Lila to handle. We're here to discuss a professional one. We're here to discuss your debt. Brent laughed. It was not a sound of mirth, but a sharp, percussive burst of disbelief and condescension. He actually leaned back on his heels, a smirk playing on his lips as he folded his arms across his chest. The initial flicker of unease had been extinguished by his own ingrained arrogance. This was exactly what he expected. A pathetic, emotional appeal from a man out of his depth, flanked by a couple of small-time lawyers he'd probably hired for the occasion to try and look intimidating. My debt, he repeated, savoring the word as if it were a fine wine. What on earth does my debt have to do with you, Robert? Let me guess. You're here to offer to pay it all off for me in exchange for taking Lila back. Is that it? A grand gesture from the concerned father. I appreciate the thought. I really do. But I have to tell you, the price for that kind of reconciliation would be very, very high. Probably more than you'd be willing to part with. He was enjoying this, the feeling of absolute power. He was the one in control here, and this little delegation was just a sad confirmation of his victory. Robert did not react. His face remained a placid, unreadable mask. The response came instead from Mr. Davies, who stepped forward with the unhurried confidence of a man who held all the cards. He opened his briefcase on Brent's glass coffee table, the very table where Brent and Naomi had toasted their new life, and laid out a single, thick, professionally bound document. The thud of the paper on the glass was a small, definitive sound in the cavernous room. Mr. Patterson, we are not here to negotiate a family matter. Mr. Davies began, his voice a steady, implacable drone that seemed to absorb the room's ambient light. We are here to inform you of a change in your financial status. This is a summary of your current liabilities. For the sake of clarity, let's start with your primary business concern, Patterson Development, LLC. He tapped a manicured finger on the top page. You currently have 2 outstanding commercial loans for your Azure Point and Skyview Terrace projects. The combined principal totals approximately $42 million. The original lender, as you know, was First National Commercial Bank. I'm well aware of my own business loans. Thank you, Brent, said his voice laced with impatience. This was tedious. My payments are all current. My accounts are in perfect standing. What is the point of this? Mr. Davies didn't even look up. He continued as if Brent hadn't spoken. First National Commercial's loan portfolio was acquired 9 months ago by the CFG Investment Group. You would have received a standard notice of the transfer of servicer. Brent vaguely remembered a memo from his accounting department, something he had glanced at and dismissed as routine corporate shuffling. And CFG Investment Group, Mr. Davies said, finally lifting his eyes to meet Brent's, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Conway Trust and Financial. You've been paying your father-in-law's bank for nearly a year, Mr. Patterson. Congratulations. The air in Brent's lungs seemed to turn to ice. The smug, confident smirk on his face faltered, twitching at the corners. He stared at Mr. Davies, then shot a wild, disbelieving look at Robert. That's impossible. That can't be right. Conway Trust is a small regional player. They don't operate at that level. His own words sounded hollow, a desperate attempt to reaffirm a reality that was rapidly dissolving around him. A common misconception, Ms. Chen interjected, her voice as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. She produced another document from her own briefcase, laying it neatly beside the first. The trap was being set piece by methodical piece. Now let's discuss this house, a beautiful property. Your statement piece. You have a mortgage of $3.2 million with Metro Urban Lenders. A fine institution. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, began to crawl up Brent's throat. He knew what was coming before she even said it. He felt a profound sense of vertigo, as if the polished concrete floor was tilting beneath his feet, sliding him toward an open abyss. As you may have read in the financial news last year, she continued, her tone dripping with mock helpfulness. Conway Trust acquired Metro Urban's entire regional mortgage division in a strategic expansion. Your last 7 mortgage payments, including the one that cleared just last week, have been processed through our central office. This house, Mr. Patterson, belongs to us. Brent stumbled back a step, his bravado not just vanishing but being ripped out of him, leaving a gaping wound of pure horror. The walls of his home, the very symbol of his success and his new life with Naomi, suddenly felt like the bars of a cage he had unknowingly built for himself. He was a fool, a preening, arrogant fool played from the very beginning. And finally Miss Chen said, delivering the coup de grace, there are the small things. The lifestyle, your personal and business credit lines, the platinum cards you use for travel, for those expensive dinners at Venti, for the suits and the watches, all issued by institutions whose debt portfolios are underwritten and ultimately held by Conway Trust. In total, Brent, your entire financial existence, your business, your home, the very clothes on your back is leveraged with funds that he... She gestured with her pen towards Robert. Ultimately controls. For the first time since he had entered the room, Robert spoke again. He took a slow step away from the window, his quiet presence suddenly more immense and terrifying than any shouting threat. You called me a relic, Brent. You told my daughter I didn't understand how the modern world works. But you see, I do. I understand that true power isn't in the shiny things you can buy. It's in owning the paper that allows other people to buy shiny things. You built a house of cards on what you thought was a solid foundation, but the foundation was me all along. You thought you were the architect, but you were just a tenant borrowing my bricks, and I'm cashing out. The words hung in the air, each one a death sentence. Brent stared at him, his mouth agape, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of panic and denial. The web was complete. Every direction he turned, he was trapped. Every dollar he thought he had earned. Every deal he thought he had closed, every brick he thought he had laid was built upon a foundation owned by the man he had sauntered on and discarded. He had not just married Lila. He had, in effect, signed the most binding and foolish business contract of his life without ever reading the fine print. And he had just tried to dissolve the partnership by throwing the chairman's daughter out into the rain. What? What does that mean? Brent stammered the question, a pathetic squeak from a man who once roared. Miss Davies answered his tone as devoid of emotion as a legal filing. It means we are calling in your loans. All of them. Effective immediately. You can't do that, Brent finally shrieked, his voice cracking with a raw, primal panic. You can't. My payments are current. There's no legal reason. On the contrary, Ms. Chen said coolly, tapping a specific clause on one of the documents before her. Her finger rested on the text like an executioner's blade. We have several perfectly legal reasons. Your initial applications contained what we have now identified as material misrepresentations regarding implied familial financial backing. You used your marriage to Mr. Conway's daughter as a selling point to secure our money, which constitutes a form of fraud. Furthermore, your recent, shall we say, lifestyle changes present a significant reputational risk and project a brand instability that we, as the primary creditor, are no longer comfortable with. The default clauses in your loan agreements are quite clear. We have the right to demand full and immediate repayment if we believe our investment is at risk. And Mr. Conway, she glanced at Robert, believes his investment is very much at risk. The silence that descended upon the room was heavier and more suffocating than any sound. It was the silence of a tomb, the dead air after a fatal blow. For Brent, it was absolute. The confident, articulate man who had commanded boardrooms and charmed investors was gone, replaced by a hollow shell whose mind was frantically trying to outrun an avalanche. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine, blocking out everything but the echo of Ms. Chen's final devastating pronouncements. He looked from her cold, impassive face to the stoic figure of Mr. Davies. Then finally his desperate gaze landed on Robert. His father-in-law had not moved. He stood by the expansive glass wall, his hands clasped behind his back, looking not at the ruin of the man before him, but out at the glittering city skyline, the very view that Brent had believed was the ultimate symbol of his triumph, his conquest. It was his. He had paid millions for it. But the view now seemed to mock him, a panorama of a world he was no longer a part of. The entire structure of his reality had been revealed as a lie. He was not a king in his castle. He was a tenant in his father-in-law's property. He was not a brilliant developer. He was a debtor, unknowingly making payments to the very man he had dismissed as an irrelevant old fossil. The floor, so solid and polished beneath his feet, suddenly felt like a sheet of thin ice cracking and groaning under the impossible weight of his ignorance. "Robert, please." Brent finally managed to whisper the name, tasting like ash and bile in his dry mouth. His arrogance, the very fuel that had powered his existence, had evaporated in an instant, leaving behind only the raw, sputtering engine of pure terror. He took a staggering step forward, his hands slightly raised in a gesture of supplication. "Please, it was a mistake, a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. I was angry. I was stressed about the new projects. I didn't mean it. I'll fix things with Lila. I'll get on my knees. I'll do anything. We can reverse this." Robert turned his head slowly, his movement deliberate and devoid of haste. His eyes, calm and clear, finally met Brent's. There was no rage in them, no fire of retribution. There was no hatred. There was only a profound, bottomless disappointment and a chilling finality that was far more terrifying than any anger could ever be. "You don't seem to understand, Brent." Robert said, his voice quiet, but carrying an immense gravity that filled the cavernous room. "This is not a negotiation. There is nothing to fix. There is no reversing this. You have a fundamental misunderstanding of your situation, just as you have had a fundamental misunderstanding of me from the very beginning. You believe you made a mistake. You didn't. You made a series of business decisions." He paused, letting the words sink in, twisting the knife of Brent's own transactional worldview. Your first decision was to leverage yourself to the absolute limit, building an image of success on a mountain of debt. Your second was to build your entire enterprise on my money, all while holding me and my family in private contempt. And your third, your most critical and unforgivable business decision, was made 3 nights ago when you laid your hands on my pregnant daughter and threw her out of her home into a storm. Robert took a single measured step forward, away from the window. You see this house? He asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. You walk through it with the pride of an owner. But you are not the owner. You are merely the occupant of an asset whose deed is held as collateral against a loan you can no longer pay. As of this moment, you are trespassing. Brent's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. He felt a crushing weight on his chest, as if the immense glass walls of his precious house were slowly closing in on him. Those condo developments you are so proud of. Robert continued, his voice relentless and methodical. Their funding will be frozen by the end of the business day. The contractors will receive a stop work order. Your investors will panic. Your new business partners, like Naomi's ambitious father, will scatter the second they hear that Conway Trust has pulled its funding. They will see you not as a peer, but as a liability. By Monday morning, Patterson Development LLC will be a hollowed-out shell facing a dozen lawsuits and an inevitable bankruptcy. Every word was a nail being hammered into the lid of his coffin. Brent's vision started to swim, the sharp, clean lines of the room blurring and warping at the edges. The cars are leased through a company we own. They will be repossessed tomorrow. Robert went on, ticking off the items of Brent's life, as if reading from an inventory sheet. The credit cards will be declined the next time you try to buy a cup of coffee. The bank accounts tied to your business and your person will be frozen to cover outstanding liabilities. You valued polish over people, Brent. You valued statements over substance. You have built a life based on an image, and I am simply and very quietly taking away the props that hold it up. Brent wanted to scream, to rage, to deny it all, but no sound would come out. He was paralyzed, caught in the invisible, unbreakable threads of the web he had never even seen. He thought of Naomi, her bright, hard laugh, her admiration for his power. Would she stand by him? He knew the answer with a sickening certainty. She was drawn to the sun, and he was now a black hole. You put a price on my daughter. Robert, said his voice, dropping now to barely a whisper, a tone so intimate it was more piercing than any shout. In your cold accounting, you saw her as an asset, a failed investment. So I am showing you what it feels like when your most valuable asset is liquidated. You are bankrupt, Brent. But your financial ruin is the least of your problems. It is merely a symptom of a much deeper poverty. You are morally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt. You have nothing left because you were never anything to begin with. That was the final blow. The word nothing. It echoed in the vast, empty space where his future used to be. It was the valuation of his entire existence. The floor seemed to drop away from him completely. His knees, no longer able to support the weight of his shattered world, buckled. A strangled animal cry of pure despair tore from his throat as his vision narrowed to a black tunnel. The last thing he saw were the indistinct, swimming faces of Robert Miss Chen and Mr. Davies watching him without pity as he pitched forward. Brent Patterson. The man who thought he had it, all the master of his universe, collapsed in a heap onto the cold, polished concrete floor of the house that was never truly his. 6 months later, the world had turned. The bruised, storm-soaked sky of that terrible night had given way to a season of soft golden light. This light now streamed through the large bay window of a sun-drenched room illuminating the gentle dance of dust motes in the air. The room smelled of baby powder, warm milk, and fresh linen, the perfume of a new life. Lila sat in a sturdy wooden rocking chair, a family heirloom that had held 3 generations of mothers. Its gentle creak, a soothing rhythm against the polished hardwood floor. In her arms, nestled against her heart, slept her son, Leo. She had named him Leo because it meant lion, and she wanted him to possess a strength of heart his father could never comprehend. He was tiny perfect, his little chest rising and falling in the profound peace of infancy. His tiny starfish hand was curled tightly around her index finger, a small anchor in her new calm sea. As she looked down at his serene face, a wave of love so fierce and overwhelming washed over her that it still, after weeks of motherhood, took her breath away. This was real. This solid, warm weight in her arms, this unconditional bond. This was the wealth Brent had spoken of, though he had never truly understood the word. She glanced around the nursery. It was a world away from the cold, minimalist cage she had once called home. The walls were a cheerful butter yellow. A mobile of hand-stitched felt animals turned slowly above the crib. The bookshelves her father had built were overflowing, not with design magazines, but with colorful children's books and well-loved stuffed animals. Every object in the room was a testament to love, not a statement of status. Her mother had sewn the curtains. Her father had painted the walls. This room was a fortress built of affection, and inside it, Lila felt herself healing stitch by stitch. The divorce had been a quiet, sterile affair, a mere formality that passed in a blur of paperwork. Brent had been a ghost at the proceedings, his presence thin and brittle. He had not contested a single thing. He was in no position to. Lila had asked for nothing from him. No alimony, no child support, no bitter settlement. She wanted no ties, no financial chains that would keep her tethered to the memory of him. Her freedom was worth more than any check he could no longer write. She had her name back, Lila Conway, and in shedding the name Patterson, she felt as though she had shed a heavy, ill-fitting coat. She had heard about Brent's fate, not through any effort of her own, but through the inevitable whispers that travel through old social circles. A former acquaintance had called her voice laced with a hesitant, gossipy sort of pity. Just as her father had predicted, Brent's empire had not just crumbled. It had been pulverized, turning to dust overnight. His business partners, including Naomi's cutthroat father, had severed all ties the moment the news broke that Conway Trust had pulled his funding. His name was poison in the development community. And Naomi, the dazzling prize for whom he had sacrificed everything, had vanished. She had not lingered to witness the collapse. Her loyalty, it turned out, was an asset with a price tag, and a bankrupt boyfriend was a liability she couldn't afford. The last Lila heard. Brent was living in a grim one-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of town, the kind with thin walls and a view of a brick alleyway. He was working a commission-only job, selling discount office supplies over the phone. The caller had described seeing him on the street, his once impeccable Italian suit replaced by a cheap, wrinkled polyester one that hung awkwardly on his thinned frame. The arrogant, confident stride was gone, replaced by the weary, defeated shuffle of a man haunted by the ghosts of his own ambition. Lila felt no surge of triumph at this news, no satisfying sting of schadenfreude. There was only a profound, quiet sense of closure. He was a stranger to her now, the protagonist of a sad story she had once been a part of. He had chased an image of success so relentlessly that he had become hollow, and once the glamorous frame was stripped away, there was simply nothing left inside. He had lost everything, because he had never understood the value of anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. A soft footstep in the doorway brought her back to the present. Her father stood there, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. His face, which had been a mask of grim determination for weeks after her return home, was softer now, the lines around his eyes etched by smiles rather than stress. He looked at his daughter and then at his grandson, and a look of pure, unadulterated joy transformed him. He tiptoed into the room, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "How's my favorite little lion doing?" Lila smiled a genuine, soul-deep smile that reached her eyes. "Sleeping soundly. Dreaming of hostile takeovers, I think." Her father chuckled, pulling up a small stool to sit beside her. He reached out a single calloused finger and gently stroked Leo's soft cheek. "He has your peaceful nature, Lila Bean." Thank goodness. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long moment, the only sounds the creak of the rocker and the baby's soft breathing. "Thank you, Dad," Lila whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for all of that, but for this, for never saying I told you so." He looked at her, his expression serious. There was nothing to say. A father protects his family. It's the only contract that matters. Brent's failure was his own doing. My only concern was and always will be you and him. He nodded toward the sleeping baby. In his simple words, Lila understood the vast difference between Brent and her father. Brent saw life as a series of transactions. Her father saw it as a sacred trust. He had never gloated about Brent's ruin. He had simply been there, a quiet, unshakable mountain, providing the shelter she needed to rebuild her world on a foundation of rock, not sand. She looked from her father's kind face to her son's innocent one. The memory of that night, the cold rain, the venom in Brent's voice, the final brutal click of the deadbolt, no longer felt like a scar. It felt like a turning point. That sound, which she once thought was her world shattering, was actually the sound of her cage breaking open. Brent had meant to throw her away, but instead he had set her free. Free from a life of cold surfaces and hollow promises, and free to discover a life of true, meaningful, and immeasurable substance. We've just witnessed the complete and total downfall of a man who believed that people were just assets to be managed and discarded. Brent thought he was making a smart business move by throwing his pregnant wife Lila out of his life. He saw her and her family as obstacles to his ambition, but he made a fatal miscalculation. He underestimated the quiet, patient power of a father's love and the unbreakable laws of karma. In his greedy pursuit of a flashier future, he ignored the foundation his entire life was built on. And when it was pulled out from under him, he was left with nothing. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's the silent, steady force that moves mountains, and that treating people with cruelty and disrespect is a debt that always eventually gets called in. If this story of betrayal and righteous justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story where karma delivers the final satisfying verdict. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of life's dramatic twists and turns. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Dark clouds gathered over the Rutherford estate as guests arrived for what was poised to be the season's most glamorous engagement dinner. Whispers of old family secrets drifted among the candlelit tables, while fresh flowers perfumed the warm night air. Billionaire Ambrose Rutherford, heir to a centuries-old fortune, stood at the threshold, ready to introduce his fiancée to the world. But in the bustling kitchen, there was someone who never expected to set foot on Rutherford soil again. Her heart raced as servers carried out trays of gourmet hors d'oeuvres, for beyond the sizzling pans and decorative platters lay a secret: she was his ex-wife, and she wasn't alone. Ambrose Rutherford had always been a symbol of prestige in the eastern corridors of high society. Born into a lineage that traced back to British nobility, he lived in a sprawling estate perched on the outskirts of New York City. The Rutherford name was attached to philanthropy, galas, exclusive fundraisers, and investments that shaped entire industries. The staff in his home were as loyal to him as they had been to his parents and grandparents before him. Even the driver who picked up Ambrose from the airport whenever he flew in from global business trips had known him since childhood. This evening, Ambrose wore a crisp midnight blue suit tailored in London, his cufflinks gleaming under the chandelier's warm glow. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating a new chapter. After years of heartbreak and caution around romance, he was finally engaged to a woman named Juliana Carlyle, a charming socialite with a keen sense for public relations and a family name that commanded respect. Their engagement had set gossip columns alight, each speculating how quickly Ambrose had moved on from a private past. What no one realized, perhaps not even Juliana, was how deeply Ambrose's wounds still ran. Though the official story was that he had divorced a woman named Geneviève Leclerc years ago, few knew the circumstances of their union or their separation. Ambrose had locked those memories away, sealing them behind success, philanthropy, and relentless work. He had buried himself in new acquisitions, real estate ventures, and invitations to private events. His ex-wife had become something of a phantom in society gossip. Some doubted she had ever existed at all. Inside the grand hall, tall vases of burgundy roses adorned the tables. White-gloved servers wove through the crowd, discreetly offering flutes of champagne. A violin quartet played softly near the fireplace, setting a tone that was both elegant and intimate. Ambrose offered polite smiles to old acquaintances, the Van Pelts, the Whitmores, the Carlyle clan. His soon-to-be in-laws flitted about greeting guests and accepting congratulations. Yet a subtle tension crackled in the air, as if something momentous was about to happen. From the adjoining kitchen came the sound of pans clanging and frenzied chatter among the catering staff. In that realm of heat and swirling aromas, the head caterer lifted her chin confidently. She had insisted on personally supervising this event, though the truth was, she had dreaded it from the moment she recognized the client's name. Geneviève Leclerc, once Geneviève Leclerc. Rutherford never dreamed she would be back at the estate where she had once dared to believe in a forever love. Yet there she was, wearing a spotless white chef's coat embroidered with the name of the catering company she had launched on her own. The irony was almost too bitter to swallow. As she meticulously arranged sauce drizzles and garnishes on porcelain plates, her hands trembled. For nearly 6 years, she had hidden away from the Rutherford name, determined to raise her secret in anonymity. Tonight, fate had other plans. Genevieve's mind spun back to the very first day she had stepped into Rutherford Manor years ago as a wide-eyed culinary student. She had been accepted into an exclusive cooking internship, and the Rutherfords had hosted a lavish party. Ambrose had been a mere acquaintance at the time, the handsome heir who kept to himself. It was during the post-event cleanup, when Genevieve accidentally stumbled and spilled a tray of baked desserts, that she first found herself face to face with him. Instead of chastising her, he knelt beside her on the marble floor, helping to clean the mess. He had been gentle, concerned, quietly laughing at the absurdity of the situation. That day he asked for her name, and Genevieve had felt an electric rush course through her veins. Now, years later, the memory weighed heavily upon her heart. Every corner of the grand estate reminded her of some moment with him dancing under the gazebo at midnight, chasing each other through the manicured gardens during a sudden storm, laughing as they tried to whip up a homemade dessert in the giant kitchen after hours. The estate had once been a place of love and warmth, but after their messy divorce, it became a place she vowed never to return. Genevieve paused, taking a deep breath. The hustle of her staff reminded her that she had a job to do. She was here on a professional contract, nothing more. Her arms were strong from years of kneading dough and hauling crates of produce, her eyes determined from a life spent forging her own path. If Ambrose recognized her, and he would if he saw her, she would confront it head-on. Or she might do her best to remain hidden in the chaos, letting the waiters handle the final presentations in the dining hall. Her heart battered her chest as she heard one of the servers mention Mr. Rutherford's fiancée. The word had an icy sting. Once she had been that fiancée. Once she had been the woman who believed she would share a lifetime with him. Now she was just the caterer. But she had something else up her sleeve. 3 somethings to be exact. 3 small hearts that reminded her every day of the man she had once married. Their triplets, 2 boys and a girl, awaited her in a safe, discreet home miles away. She had not told Ambrose about them, convinced that he had made his choice to be free of her. And if he wanted no part of her, surely he wanted no part of them. She had built a life for those children, Darian, Lila, and Marcus, that steered them away from the swirling complications of high society. Yet a part of her always wondered in those quiet moments at night if she should have told him. Juliana Carlyle had already begun to sense that something was off about her husband-to-be that evening. She had been introduced to many of Ambrose's old family friends, and though he performed the role impeccably, smiling at all the right times, ensuring she was never left alone in the crowd, she felt an undercurrent of tension. His jaw clenched whenever the discussion strayed toward the catering arrangements. It was subtle, but years of navigating high society engagements had taught Juliana how to read the slightest shift in posture or intonation. Rumor had reached her ears that there was a unique caterer on board tonight, someone rumored to have ties to the Rutherford family. Curiosity gnawed at her, but she knew better than to pry in front of an audience. Instead, she maintained her own impeccable composure, perfectly coiffed hair, and an elegant gown that whispered class with every step. She accepted compliments about the decor, draped in gold and deep burgundy, the Rutherford family colors expressing gratitude for the staff's extraordinary efforts. Yet an unease haunted her. She had never fully grasped the details of Ambrose's divorce. It was a topic he masterfully evaded. There was talk of an impulsive, short-lived marriage. Some whispered that he had married beneath him a woman of no particular social standing. Others spun wild speculation that she was a foreign heiress, that she had run off with a portion of his fortune, or that she had vanished. None of the stories matched up. Juliana had chosen not to pressure him. After all, their relationship had blossomed quickly, and it was fueled by a mutual desire for partnership, hers for a stable, upstanding partner who could support her philanthropic pursuits, and his for a well-connected woman who would strengthen his social standing even further. She surveyed the room, noticing a door at the far end, leading to the kitchen corridor. She had explored every inch of the Rutherford estate, but that corridor always held a magnetic pull. She knew it led to places not typically shown on tours. On an impulse, She slipped away from the chatter heading toward it. Something compelled her to see what was behind the scenes of this meticulously orchestrated event. Genevieve's footsteps echoed on the gleaming tiles as she slipped out of the kitchen to direct a server who was lost in the labyrinth of hallways. She was dressed in a neat uniform, her hair pinned back, though a few rebellious strands framed her face. At that moment, she nearly collided with Juliana Carlyle, who looked equally startled. The two women froze in place, eyes locking in mutual surprise. Juliana took in the figure before her, noticing the quiet self-confidence in her stance. "I'm sorry," Juliana said, regaining her composure. "I was just looking around. You must be part of the catering team." "Everything is lovely so far." Genevieve forced a polite smile. "Thank you. We're doing our best to make it a memorable evening." Something about Genevieve's voice caught Juliana's attention. It was gentle, yet resonant with emotion. She detected a sadness behind those calm eyes, a tinge of pain that spoke volumes, but she brushed it off. There was no reason to suspect anything amiss. "I'm Juliana, by the way," she offered. Genevieve nodded. "Genevieve?" she replied, pausing before adding, "It's a pleasure to meet you." She quickly corrected herself. "I should get back. There's a lot to oversee tonight." She turned to leave, but Juliana found herself calling out, "Thank you again for your hard work." When Genevieve disappeared around the corner, Juliana couldn't shake the sense that something was swirling in the air. She found herself wondering why the woman's name rang a distant bell. But with so many invitations and staff, she let it pass for the moment. Genevieve pressed a hand to her chest as she returned to the kitchen, adrenaline pounding in her veins. She had come face to face with the woman who would soon be Ambrose's wife. A flood of conflicting emotions overtook her. It felt surreal, like the dream colliding with reality. This was the woman who would soon wear Ambrose's ring, who would be introduced to the world as Mrs. Rutherford. And all Genevieve could think about was the children at home, the ones she had never shared with him. Back in the main hall, Ambrose felt an unsettling tingle ripple up his spine. He surveyed the room, seeing only well-dressed socialites and waiters. But something was off. A strange hush had settled, as though the very air carried echoes of the past. For a fleeting moment he recalled the day Genevieve had left him. They had been in the estate's sunroom sunlight filtering through the glass, illuminating the heartbreak etched on her face. All their arguments about money, about his family's demands, about her feeling stifled in this life she never asked for, it had all erupted in one final confrontation. He remembered the tears in her eyes as she turned away. "This isn't the life I wanted," she had whispered. He reached out, but she pulled free. 2 days later, she was gone. Their marriage undone in what felt like the blink of an eye. But now, an almost familiar presence lurked in the corners of the hall. He tried to banish the memory, reminding himself that tonight was about celebrating his engagement. Still, he found himself scanning faces, searching. Why was his heart pounding? Why did he feel as though she was near? The quartet's music reached a soft crescendo, and Ambrose smiled politely, rejoining the conversation with his old friend Arthur Kingsley. Arthur was congratulating him on the engagement, extolling Juliana's virtues. "She'll make a fine companion," Arthur said. "Much better suited to this world. Less complicated," he added, sipping his champagne. The word stung Ambrose, who tried not to show it. He glanced at the extravagant ring on Juliana's finger from across the room, hoping the choice he made was the right one. Juliana eventually returned to Ambrose's side, linking her arm through his. She leaned in, whispering, "Everything is so beautiful, but you seem tense." He feigned a relaxed smile. Just the usual nerves of hosting, he lied. Have you enjoyed meeting everyone? She nodded, but he could see curiosity flickering in her gaze. Something told him she had encountered a mystery. Yet she said nothing more, choosing to maintain decorum. The couple circulated the hall, accepting well wishes and compliments. Soon the staff announced that dinner would be served, and the guests began to move toward the elegantly arranged dining tables. In the kitchen, Genevieve was orchestrating the plating of a 6-course feast. Her staff worked with synchronized precision. She peeked through the swinging door that led to the dining room, catching a glimpse of Ambrose from behind. He stood at the head of a table with Juliana at his side. Their body language exuded comfort unity. The ring on Juliana's finger gleamed, a symbol of a promise that was never hers to keep. Genevieve felt a pang of jealousy, quickly followed by a flood of guilt. She had no claim to him anymore, not after the divorce. But more than that, the secrecy about the triplets weighed heavily on her. She thought back to the day she discovered she was pregnant. It happened shortly after their last argument, just as they were finalizing divorce papers. She had been in such emotional turmoil that she traveled home to see her mother in Montreal, only to faint in her old bedroom. A doctor's visit revealed the astounding truth: she wasn't just pregnant. She was carrying triplets. Fear, confusion, and a strange glimmer of hope filled her. But by then she believed Ambrose was done with her. If he hadn't wanted her around, would he want 3 children, tying him to a marriage he clearly regretted? As dinner was underway, the servers glided in carefully, placing the entrees in front of each guest. The chatter that had filled the hall quieted as everyone admired the artistic presentations of pan-seared duck butter-poached lobster and roasted seasonal vegetables. Juliana raised her glass, proposing a toast to family friends and the future. Ambrose nodded along, though his eyes occasionally darted to the entry leading back to the kitchen. Midway through the meal, a messenger arrived at the estate, an unexpected visitor. One of the staff informed Genevieve that a package marked urgent was delivered for her, worried it might be about her children. Genevieve hurried to the side entrance. Outside stood a courier holding an envelope. Inside was a note from their nanny Alicia, explaining that Darian had a mild fever. It wasn't serious, but Alicia wanted to keep Genevieve informed. Waves of maternal concern washed over her. She yearned to rush home, but she was bound by the biggest event of her catering career. The mother in her prayed that her child would be all right, that Alicia would handle everything. The businesswoman in her resolved to finish the evening and see her children as soon as she could. Genevieve tucked the note into her pocket, exhaling shakily, then returned to the fray. Back in the dining hall, the staff brought out the next course, a delicate sorbet to cleanse the palate. Ambrose took a spoonful and froze mid-taste. A subtle lingering flavor brought him crashing into his memories. It was lavender and honey. Genevieve's signature combination, something she had once devised during her culinary internship. He stared down at the dish, his heart hammering. Could it be a coincidence? His gaze snapped toward the kitchen's door. He nudged his friend, Matteo Donovan, a business partner who had known him for years. "Do you know who the caterer is?" Ambrose asked, fighting to keep his voice calm. Matteo shrugged. "Your fiancé chose them, I believe. Juliana mentioned it was some exclusive new caterer with rave reviews." Why, Ambrose stared at his sorbet, recollecting the exact day Genevieve had meticulously crafted the lavender-honey fusion. No reason, he muttered, but the tension in his face betrayed him. The music played on, forks clinked against plates, and the hum of conversation continued. Yet all Ambrose could focus on was the possibility that Genevieve was somewhere in this house. determined to either confirm his suspicions or put them to rest. Ambrose excused himself under the pretense of checking on the staff. He slipped away from the table, ignoring the puzzled looks from Juliana and some of his guests. As he approached the kitchen, the scent of fresh herbs, roasted meats, and exotic spices grew stronger. He paused in the corridor outside, inhaling sharply. He recalled the many times he and Genevieve had cooked together, her passion for flavor, the way her laughter would resonate whenever they succeeded in creating something new. Slowly, he pushed open the door. Inside was a controlled chaos, cooks hunched over cutting boards, steam rising from pot servers assembling trays of dessert. Then he saw her. Genevieve stood at the center, delegating tasks, swirling sauce onto plates with the precision of an artist. The world blurred at the edges for Ambrose. It was as though time had folded in on itself. She was older, more poised, her features sharpened by life's challenges. But she was unmistakably his Genevieve. He hovered in the doorway, unsure if he should speak or retreat. The tension snapping within him caught someone's attention. A sous chef called out, "Chef, is everything all right?" Turning. Genevieve's gaze landed on Ambrose. She froze a plate in her hand, her eyes wide, shock etched into every line of her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. The bustling kitchen seemed to fade into silence. Staff turned curious eyes toward the pair, but both Ambrose and Genevieve were too stunned to speak. Finally, Ambrose took a tentative step forward. "Genevieve," he said, his voice cracking. All the rehearsed lines he might have imagined someday saying to her evaporated, leaving him raw and exposed. Genevieve set the plate down, slowly swallowing hard. "Ambrose," she whispered. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes darting around, acutely aware of their captive audience. "Could we talk somewhere private?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. She stood rigid for a moment, her mind torn between refusing and agreeing. But this was his home, after all, and she recognized that no explanation she gave would satisfy him or her staff if she kept refusing to speak to him. Finally, she nodded. "You can use the break room at the end of the corridor," she told one of her sous chefs. Then she turned to Ambrose. "Let's go." The two walked in silence down a narrow hallway. At the break room's threshold, Genevieve paused before opening the door. Her heart felt like it was going to leap out of her chest. With one final deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, Ambrose following closely behind. The break room was modest, a small space with a round table, a few chairs, and a kitchenette. Genevieve closed the door, and they stood facing each other, the tension thick enough to taste. Ambrose was the first to speak. "You're the caterer." The question sounded ridiculous even to him, but it was all he could muster. She nodded. "I had no idea this was your event when I took the booking," she said, breath trembling. "If I had known—" He tried to swallow the lump in his throat. "If you had known, you wouldn't have taken it." She hesitated, then replied, "No, I wouldn't. But I've built my business from nothing, and my team depends on me. I couldn't just withdraw once it was set. And it's the biggest job we've had in months." Ambrose sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. "I can't believe it." He lifted his gaze to meet hers. Why didn't you ever contact me?" "After you left, I tried to find you. Your number changed, you moved. You vanished." She stiffened. "You were the one who let me go," she said, her voice tinged with anger. "Your family never accepted me. And you You were so consumed with your inheritance, your business, that I felt invisible." Ambrose pressed his lips together. A wave of regret rose inside him. "I tried to fix things," he managed. "I just didn't know how. I didn't want to lose you." "Well, you did," she responded, crossing her arms. "And I moved on." Ambrose let out a ragged breath, noting the defensive set of her shoulders. His eyes searched hers, longing to find a hint of the love they once shared. But the moment was cut short when a soft knock sounded at the door. One of the cooks poked his head in. "Chef, they need you back in the kitchen for dessert service." Genevieve nodded, dismissing him. "I'll be there in a moment. I'm engaged now," Ambrose said softly, as if trying to apologize. "Juliana Carlyle." Her jaw clenched at the name. "So I gathered," she replied. "Congratulations." There was a sharp edge to her tone. Without another word, she opened the door and returned to the corridor, leaving Ambrose to grapple with the storm of emotions inside him. Ambrose emerged from the break room, in a daze, stumbling back into the grand hall where dessert was being served. His guests cast curious glances at him, noting the unsettled expression on his face. Juliana, in particular, approached him with concern. She touched his arm lightly. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." He forced a smile. "Just a bit of a headache," he lied. "I'll be fine." Across the room, Genevieve's staff delivered ornate plates of chocolate soufflé, topped with a delicate raspberry coulis. Conversations resumed, but Ambrose felt as though he were trapped behind a glass wall, isolated with his racing thoughts. Every bite he took tasted like regret. Meanwhile, Genevieve remained in the kitchen, leaning against a counter to steady herself. She had dreamt of how she might react if she ever saw him again, but those fantasies were nothing like this cold, harsh reality. How was she supposed to focus on running the last course of the dinner when her mind was drowning in memories and unresolved pain? She couldn't tell him about the children. Not now. Not in the middle of his engagement dinner. The revelation would be catastrophic, destructive for everyone involved, especially the children. Yet a small voice inside her whispered that he deserved to know. That they deserved to know their father. But how Juliana tried her best to engage in conversations, but her focus kept drifting back to Ambrose. Something about his sudden disappearance to the kitchen, followed by his tense demeanor upon return, set off alarm bells in her mind. A subtle urgency compelled her to find out what had happened. When Ambrose excused himself again this time to make a phone call, she decided to do some investigating of her own. Slipping away from the table, she made her way toward the kitchen once more. The staff was busy with final cleanup, but she spotted a woman in the corner, removing her chef's hat and wiping her brow. Recognition lit within Juliana. This was the same woman she had met in the corridor earlier. Genevieve. Juliana approached gently, though her steps were decisive. "Genevieve Wright?" she asked. "I just wanted to say how marvelous everything was tonight. The dishes were exquisite." Genevieve forced a smile, trying to steady her voice. "Thank you, Miss Carlyle. I appreciate that." Juliana tilted her head. "I can't help but feel there's something familiar about you." "Have we met before?" Genevieve stiffened. "I don't think so." She lied politely. "I primarily work in the kitchen, behind the scenes." Juliana studied her eyes, narrowing. She hesitated, then said, "You're sure?" There was a moment of tense silence. Before Genevieve could formulate a response, they were interrupted by another staff member asking for the chef's input on leftover dessert plating. Juliana took the opportunity to slip back into the crowd, but a growing sense of unease accompanied her. Clearly something was being hidden from her. When dinner ended, Ambrose escorted Juliana to a private lounge area where brandy and coffee were being served to a smaller circle of close friends and family. The rest of the guests mingled or wandered out to the gardens. The warm glow of the setting sun filtered through the glass doors, painting the room in soft oranges and pinks. Arthur Kingsley approached Ambrose once again, swirling a glass of brandy. "Wonderful event," he drawled. "Though you vanished for a bit, my friend. Anything you want to share?" Ambrose stiffened, forcing a laugh. "Just dealing with a small kitchen issue," he said, deflecting. "You know how these events can be." Arthur smirked. "Indeed," he replied, his voice dripping with subtle suspicion. He never had liked the Rutherford family's tendency to keep secrets, and he was sharp enough to know when one was afloat. As the evening wound down, the staff began clearing plates and packing up. Genevieve told her team to load everything discreetly, tiptoeing around to avoid disturbing the lingering guests. All she wanted was to leave this estate behind and never come back. But fate had one more moment of drama in store. Juliana, still unsettled, found herself wandering into a side hallway once more. She was surprised to see an older maid, Harriet, who had been with the Rutherford family for decades. Juliana stopped, offering a kind smile. "Good evening, Harriet. I believe that's your name." Harriet curtsied slightly. "Yes, ma'am. How may I help you?" "I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work." "Everything has been wonderful tonight," Juliana said. Then, sensing Harriet's warm, maternal nature, she took a leap of curiosity. "If you don't mind me asking, have you been here long?" Harriet smiled fondly. "Oh, quite long, miss. I served Mr. Ambrose's parents, rest their souls. I've seen a great many things in this house." Juliana decided to probe further. "Then perhaps you might recall if Ambrose was ever married before." Harriet's face tightened, the corners of her mouth turning down. She lowered her gaze, fidgeting with her apron. "He was miss, a lovely young lady. But they parted ways." Juliana's heartbeat quickened. "Might I ask her name? I know it's in the past, but I'm curious about anything that might help me understand Ambrose better." Harriet hesitated, then said quietly, "Her name was Genevieve. Genevieve Leclerc. She was a chef, you see, from a modest background. She had a beautiful heart, but there were complications. The family didn't fully accept her." Harriet looked up, eyes brimming with sympathy. She left abruptly. It was a difficult time for both of them. The blood drained from Juliana's face. She remembered the encounter in the corridor, Genevieve the caterer, and Ambrose disappearing to the kitchen. The puzzle pieces snapped into place with a terrifying clarity. Juliana forced a smile. "Thank you, Harriet. I appreciate your honesty." She walked away, heart pounding. The woman behind tonight's incredible meal was Ambrose's ex-wife, and judging by the tension she'd sensed, there were wounds that never fully healed. Before Genevieve could slip out of the estate, she found herself cornered by Ambrose, once more this time, in the narrow passage leading to the loading dock. He looked both determined and conflicted, his eyes pleading. "Genevieve, wait." She clutched a box of utensils, refusing to meet his gaze. "I have to go. The event's over, and I'm done here. Please, just a minute," he insisted. "Why didn't you tell me you started your own catering company? Why did you vanish without a trace?" Her face hardened. What difference would it have made? "It's my life, Ambrose. I owed you nothing after our divorce." He stepped closer, pain lacing his voice. "We were never truly divorced in our hearts. You know that." The words spilled out before he could catch them. But the moment they hung in the air, he realized how complicated the truth was. Genevieve's eyes flashed. That's where you're wrong. We signed the papers. It's done. You have your new life, your new fiancé. Enjoy it." Tears threatened to break through her composure, but she refused to let them. Instead, she pushed past him. He reached for her arm, but she pulled free, turning the corner. The clatter of her catering crates followed her as she fled, leaving Ambrose standing alone in that dimly lit corridor, his entire world spinning. Juliana had witnessed enough to understand the core of the situation. She entered the corridor just as Genevieve disappeared around the bend. Seeing Ambrose standing there distraught, Juliana approached. He locked eyes with her guilt flooding his face. "Juliana." She held up a trembling hand, her eyes hard. "You knew the caterer was your ex-wife and you said nothing." His throat bobbed. "I only found out tonight. I swear I had no idea she was handling this event." Juliana's fury ignited her voice, dropping to a hiss. "That's not what concerns me. It's the way you looked at her. The secrets you've kept. If there was something unresolved, you should have told me before you proposed." Ambrose tried to explain, but words failed him. He realized how badly he had managed the situation. "I didn't expect her to come back into my life," he whispered. "There's a history, but I thought it was over." Juliana's expression revealed a deep hurt. "History doesn't look over to me." She turned on her heel and marched away. Ambrose stood there watching her go, knowing the foundation of trust between them was crumbling. Hours later, Genevieve finally arrived at her modest home, a far cry from the Rutherford mansion. She slipped off her shoes and rushed into the children's bedroom. Alicia was there, reading a story to Darian and Marcus, while Lila was already dozing off. The boys brightened at seeing their mother, though Darian's face was flushed with the remnants of a fever. "How is he?" Genevieve asked softly, pressing her hand to Darian's forehead. Alicia smiled. "Better. The fever's coming down. He just needs rest." Genevieve's heart squeezed with relief. She thanked Alicia, who gathered her things to leave for the night. Once she was gone, Genevieve settled on the edge of the bed. Darian cuddled closer, his small hand gripping hers. Marcus, ever curious, asked, "Mummy, did you cook nice food for the big, fancy party?" She mustered a smile. "Yes, sweetie. It was a big night. Lots of people liked the food." "Are they nice people?" Darian mumbled sleepily. Genevieve swallowed, remembering Ambrose Juliana and all the conflict. "Some of them are," she said gently. "Others, we'll see." She sang a lullaby in French, the language of her childhood, and watched her children drift off to sleep. A pang of longing for a different life twisted in her gut. She envisioned Ambrose with the children. Would he read them? Bedtime stories share in their laughter. Watch them grow. But reality crashed back with brutal force. Ambrose was engaged to another woman, his life 1,000 miles from her own. She stroked Darian's hair, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. In their innocent faces, she saw the promise of a better tomorrow. But was that tomorrow big enough to hold the truth of who their father was? After Juliana left him in the corridor, Ambrose wandered the estate aimlessly. Eventually, he retreated to his private study, where he poured himself a stiff drink. He stared at the portrait of his parents hanging on the wall. They had always emphasized the importance of preserving the family legacy, urging him to marry someone who fit their status. Genevieve had never stood a chance against their disapproval, and Ambrose himself had been too weak to stand by her unconditionally, too consumed with the demands of his lineage. He downed the drink, the liquor burning his throat. Memories flashed through his mind, a vision of Genevieve laughing as they danced barefoot in the garden, the whisper of her voice when she told him she would always be there for him, no matter what. Lies all undone. His phone buzzed, and he saw Juliana's name on the screen, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. He felt unworthy of her, confused by his own heart, and haunted by the re-emergence of Genevieve. He recalled how Harriet, the loyal maid, had been the one who discovered Genevieve's packed suitcases the day she left. Harriet had told him, "She's a good woman, Mr. Ambrose. If she's leaving, it must be for a reason." He hadn't believed it at the time, but now he realized how deeply he had failed her. Juliana returned to her family's penthouse in Manhattan, slipping off her heels and pacing across the living room. Her mind buzzed with 1,000 questions. She recalled the sadness in Genevieve's eyes, the tension between her and Ambrose. It wasn't mere coincidence that Genevieve ended up catering this dinner. Fate, or some cosmic irony, had thrust them together. She debated whether to confront Ambrose directly, but the raw look on his face earlier suggested that he himself was grappling with the shock of seeing Genevieve again. Was there more to the story than he had shared? The family he rarely spoke of, the ex-wife who vanished, did they still love each other? Nerves churned in Juliana's stomach. She thought about her own motivations for marrying Ambrose. Love, yes, she cared for him, but also a desire for social standing and philanthropic clout. Did she truly love him enough to endure these revelations? Or would it be best to walk away now, preserving her own dignity? The next morning, Harriet approached Ambrose cautiously while he was sipping coffee in the estate's breakfast nook. He was unshaven, bleary-eyed, and wore the same clothes as the night before. Harriet set down a platter of pastries, her brow creasing in concern. "Mr. Ambrose," she began softly, "I couldn't help but notice how distressed you were last night. Is there anything you need?" He shook his head. "I'll be fine, Harriet." She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I remember Mrs. Genevieve, Miss Leclerc," she corrected. "She had a light in her. It dimmed when she realized your parents would never accept her. I saw how it hurt both of you." Ambrose stared at the table, fiddling with his coffee cup. "I just keep replaying everything, trying to figure out how it all went so wrong." Harriet bowed her head. "Sometimes when people are in pain, they do things they regret. If you still care for her, perhaps it's not too late to talk." He sighed. "She's gone, Harriet. She left with her crew. I don't know where she lives." Then a sudden thought struck him: the catering company. He could track her down through that. Part of him was terrified by the idea, but a stronger part knew he had to see her again, if only for closure. Over the next few days, Ambrose threw himself into searching for Genevieve's catering service. He had his assistant Mark comb through business directories and phone listings. Finally, they located an address in Brooklyn tied to the name Leclerc Gastronomy. Without telling anyone, not even Juliana Ambrose decided to pay a visit. He arrived in a sleek car, stepping out onto a modest street lined with local shops and cafes. The building that housed Leclerc Gastronomy was unassuming, a simple storefront with a display window showcasing photos of catered events and a small sign with the company name. Ambrose's pulse quickened as he pushed open the door. Inside, he found a receptionist who greeted him politely. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for Genevieve Leclerc," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "She's out at a tasting event right now," the receptionist replied. "Do you have an appointment?" Ambrose hesitated. "No, but I'd like to make one. It's, personal business. My name is Ambrose Rutherford." The receptionist's eyes flickered with recognition of the Rutherford name. "I'll let her know you stopped by." She took his information and he left a mixture of relief and anxiety coursing through him. He knew she would not be pleased to see him intruding on her professional turf, but he needed answers. That evening, Genevieve returned to the catering office. The receptionist passed along Ambrose's message. Genevieve's heart lurched. She'd hoped the event at the Rutherford estate would be the last time she ever had to see him. Now he was seeking her out, presumably for closure or an apology. She dreaded the confrontation, but realized she couldn't avoid him forever. She decided to schedule a meeting, feeling both dread and curiosity gnawing at her. What exactly did he want? To simply rehash old wounds? Or did he sense that she was hiding something bigger? Before the meeting date arrived, Ambrose took a more direct approach, returning to the office unannounced. Through the glass door, he spotted Genevieve at her desk reviewing menus. She looked tired, but determined, her hair swept up in a practical bun. A softness overcame his features. She was still the woman he once loved, the woman who had taught him that life was more than board meetings and social obligations. Genevieve felt his gaze and looked up, eyes widening at the sight of him. An electric current flashed between them. With a sigh, she waved him in. He stepped into her small, efficient office, glancing around at the framed photos of lavish banquets, smiling clients and staff. "You've done well," he said, genuinely impressed. She folded her arms, bracing herself. "What are you doing here, Ambrose?" He took a breath. "I just needed to talk. About us, how we ended." She leaned against her desk, trying to project confidence. "It's been nearly 6 years. I'm not sure what good talking will do now." He looked down. "I never got closure. Never understood why you completely vanished." He hesitated, adding in a softer tone, "Did I hurt you so much that you couldn't even face me?" She blinked, tears threatening. "It wasn't about hurting me. It was about living a life you seemed to have no place for. Your world demanded perfection. I couldn't meet that standard, and neither could our marriage." Ambrose's voice cracked. "If there was a chance to make it right, would you have taken it?" She shook her head, recalling how lonely she'd felt, how judged she'd been by his family. "I don't know, Ambrose. Maybe. But it's too late now." A part of her wanted to tell him about the triplets, to release this heavy secret. Yet she saw the shadows under his eyes, the weight he carried from even seeing her again. How could she upend his entire life? Meanwhile, Juliana had not been idle. She had a network of friends and contacts who prided themselves on discretion, and she wanted to know exactly who Genevieve was beyond the gossip. It didn't take long for her to uncover more details. The timeline of Genevieve's brief but intense marriage to Ambrose, the rumors of disapproval from Ambrose's parents, and the abrupt disappearance. Some hush-hush talk hinted that Genevieve might have left with more than a broken heart, but the rumors were conflicting. Determined to confront Ambrose, Juliana drove to the Rutherford estate one evening. She found him alone in the study, staring at old photographs. When he saw her, he rose to greet her, looking both guilty and relieved. "You've been distant," she stated, crossing her arms. "I know you went to see Genevieve. Don't deny it." Ambrose nodded. "I did. I just had to. I had to try to understand. It wasn't fair to you or to me to keep carrying this baggage." Juliana's eyes hardened. "So did you get the answers you needed?" He exhaled. "I'm not sure. But I do know that what we have our engagement needs honesty. I can't marry you if I'm still lying to myself about the past." She pursed her lips. "So you're calling off the wedding?" "I'm just saying, we need more time to work through this. I need clarity, and I don't want to hurt you." His voice trembled with sincerity. Juliana took a step back, anger and hurt warring on her face. "You're putting me on hold because you can't figure out your feelings for your ex-wife." The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. "It's not like that," he tried to explain. "I just decide." "Ambrose," she demanded, tears gleaming in her eyes. "You either want a future with me, or you want to chase the ghost of a marriage that ended 6 years ago. I won't be a second choice." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Ambrose to wrestle with the magnitude of his decision. Back at Genevieve's home, the triplets sensed their mother's agitation. Their bright, curious eyes watched her pace the living room phone in hand. She was waiting for a call from a prospective client, but her mind was elsewhere on Ambrose, on the conversation in her office. Marcus, the more introspective child, tugged at her sleeve. "Mummy, are you sad?" She forced a smile, scooping him into a hug. "Just tired, sweetie. Busy day at work." Darian and Lila joined them, looking concerned. Darian asked, "Did something bad happen at the fancy party?" Genevieve kissed their foreheads. "No, darling. Everything went fine. Mummy just ran into someone from her past, and it's made her think a lot." Lila pressed her large eyes, searching Genevieve's face. Genevieve's heart pounded. Should she tell them now at ages 5.5 about their father? She looked at their innocent faces, wishing she had a roadmap for this situation. Ultimately, she just said, "Someone I used to know." It's complicated. They accepted her vague answer for the moment, but she knew their questions would only grow as they got older. And the older they got, the more complicated the truth would become. A week passed in uncertainty. Juliana gave Ambrose the space he requested, but the engagement was in limbo. Genevieve tried to refocus on her catering work. She told herself she didn't need to see Ambrose again. But fate intervened. A philanthropic gala was scheduled at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and both Juliana and Ambrose were invited. Unbeknownst to Genevieve, her catering company was hired by the organizers. So once more, their paths crossed. Genevieve was adjusting a grand display of canapes in the museum's marble foyer when she sensed a pair of eyes on her. Turning, she saw Juliana standing there, elegant in a floor-length gown, her expression guarded. Genevieve's heart pounded. She braced herself for an unpleasant confrontation. Juliana approached, arms crossed. "So it's you again?" Genevieve forced professionalism. "We cater all sorts of events in the city." Juliana studied her for a long moment. Then, in a surprising turn, she said quietly, "I need to talk to you. Please. Somewhere private." Genevieve frowned but nodded. She led Juliana to a small, tucked-away alcove near the staff corridor. The distant hum of classical music and polite conversation floated through the air. Juliana wasted no time. "You still love him," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Don't you?" Genevieve tensed. "That's irrelevant. We have our history, but he's engaged to you. Is he?" Juliana's eyes flickered with pain. "He told me he needed space to figure things out. But I know he's not over you." Genevieve lowered her gaze, tears threatening to spill. "You're the one he chose. My time with him was years ago." Juliana pressed her lips together. "But you vanished, and rumor has it you took something with you. Or someone. Is there?" She trailed off, suspecting a hidden child, though she hadn't expected triplets. Genevieve's breath caught in her throat. She clenched her jaw, refusing to confirm or deny. She was not about to reveal the triplets, in a museum corridor. "You have no right to pry," she whispered sharply. Juliana's tone hardened. "I'm trying to figure out whether I'm marrying a man who has a child, or children he doesn't even know about. Do you realize how devastating that would be for everyone if this came out later?" Genevieve blinked back tears. "It's not your business. Whatever happened between Ambrose and me ended long ago." "It is my business," Juliana retorted, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I'm the one wearing his ring, and if there are children involved, that changes everything." Genevieve hesitated, then swallowed hard. "I can't talk about this now." She turned and rushed away, leaving Juliana standing there more convinced than ever that Genevieve was hiding a life-altering secret. Not long after this tense exchange, Genevieve was gathering her supplies in a secluded area when Ambrose appeared. She tried to sidestep him, but he gently caught her arm. "Genevieve, please. We can't keep running into each other like this without talking." She stared at him, tears of frustration welling. "You want to talk? Fine." She took a deep breath, preparing to release the secret she had guarded for years. In a shaky voice, she said, "There's something you need to know. After I left, I found out I was pregnant." Ambrose's eyes widened, shock flooding his features. "Pregnant with my child?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Children. Triplets, actually. 2 boys and a girl." She watched disbelief mix with sorrow on his face. "They're 5 years old, almost 6. She added, her voice catching. "I didn't tell you because I thought you wouldn't want them, or me." Ambrose pressed a hand to his temple, struggling to process the revelation. "Triplets," he repeated, his voice trembling. "How could you think I wouldn't want my own children?" His reaction burst the dam of her composure. "Because you let me walk away. You didn't fight for me. Your parents made it clear I was unworthy. I thought you'd consider them a burden." He shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I was a fool. I never stopped loving you, and I would have." He inhaled shakily. "I should have found you." Suddenly they realized they weren't alone. Juliana stood at the edge of the corridor, having overheard the conversation. Her face was pale as she absorbed the magnitude of the truth. "Triplets," she whispered, voice shaking with betrayal and sorrow. Genevieve's head dropped, guilt flooding her. Ambrose turned to Juliana, speechless. The hush that followed was deafening. The rest of the gala night passed in a blur. Genevieve left her heart pounding, half dreading Ambrose's next move. Juliana confronted Ambrose again, tears staining her cheeks. "You have children you never knew about," she whispered. "Where does that leave us?" Ambrose gently took her hands. "I'm sorry, Juliana. I never intended to hurt you. But those children are mine. I can't abandon them now that I know they exist." Juliana stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled a shaky breath. "You need to do what's right, for them and for yourself. If that means we're done, then I suppose this is goodbye." The next morning, Ambrose asked Harriet to accompany him on a drive to Genevieve's Brooklyn address. He needed to meet his children. Harriet, who had always served as a calming presence, agreed. The tension in the car was palpable as they navigated the busy city streets. When they arrived at the modest home, Ambrose felt his heart thundering in his chest. He climbed the porch steps, Harriet at his side. Genevieve opened the door, her expression guarded. Standing behind her were 3 curious faces each, with features reminiscent of Ambrose, especially Darian, whose stormy grey eyes mirrored his father's. Ambrose knelt, tears streaming down his face. Hello, he whispered, voice trembling. I'm Ambrose. The children gazed at him, unsure but intrigued. Finally, Marcus stepped forward, offering a small hand. Are you our daddy? He asked bluntly. Ambrose let out a ragged breath. He took the tiny hand in his, nodding. Yes. Yes, I am. And in that moment, the future was irrevocably changed. A father stood before his children for the first time, and a mother held her breath, wondering if a bridge could be built over all the lost years. This story has taken us through hidden truths, broken promises, and the courage it takes to face the past. Ambrose, once poised to marry into elite society again, discovered an unbreakable bond, his triplets concealed by years of heartache. Genevieve, determined to shield herself and her children, found strength in her culinary dreams and the simple life she built outside mansion walls. And Juliana, torn between anger and empathy, ultimately chose her own path of self-respect. What will become of Ambrose and Genevieve? Now that the truth is out, can the love they lost be rekindled, or are they fated to remain strangers, sharing only the gift of children? Only time will reveal how these 3 hearts and 3 little ones will heal. If you've been captivated by this emotional journey, be sure to like the video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping real-life drama fiction. See you next time.